Picture this. You're standing in the heart of Wall Street. The air is thick with tension. It's 9:29 a.m., 1 minute before the opening bell. Brokers grip their phones, whispering last-minute trades. Fund managers stare at screens that glow red with market losses. And just like that, bam, the bell rings. In an instant, the chaos erupts. Stocks nosedive. Oil treasury yields whip back and forth. The US-China trade war just escalated overnight, and the financial world is in full-blown panic mode.
It's not just the markets, Max. It's people's savings, their jobs, their businesses. This isn't just another policy dispute between Washington and Beijing. This is a full-scale economic war. And for the first time in decades, America isn't sure if it's going to win.
Come on, Sophia. This is exactly what we needed. Finally, a president with the guts to stand up to China. Trump's new tariffs are a wake-up call. We've let China take advantage of us for decades, and now the U.S. is fighting back. Wall Street's panicking? Good. That means we're finally making real moves.
Real moves? Max, the Dow just dropped 1,500 points in 5 minutes. Tech stocks are in free fall, small businesses are bracing for price hikes, and farmers are about to get crushed again. You think a financial meltdown is worth proving a point?
Sophia, let's not kid ourselves. This is what markets do. They panic. They overreact. And guess what? The smart money loves it. Hedge funds are already shorting Chinese tech stocks, and they're going to make billions off this volatility.
Right. And while billionaires sip champagne, middle-class Americans will be the ones paying the price. Have you seen what's happening at the ports? Cargo ships are stuck in limbo because no one knows how bad the tariffs will hit. Walmart, Target, Apple, companies that rely on Chinese goods are scrambling to figure out how to keep costs from exploding.
Sophia, that's exactly the point. We've been too dependent on China for way too long. You think it's a coincidence that we're in this mess? China's been playing the long game, undercutting American industries for decades. Finally, we're pushing back.
And they're pushing back too. Max, Beijing just hit back with $14 billion in tariffs of their own. American farmers, manufacturers, and energy companies are getting slammed. China is weaponizing trade just as much as we are. And at the end of the day, the people paying for this war aren't sitting in Beijing or Washington. They're sitting in grocery store aisles watching their prices go up.
You want to talk about winners and losers? Fine. Look at the hedge funds. Look at the defense contractors. Look at American tech companies that are finally cutting China out of their supply chains and bringing manufacturing back home. This is the reset we needed.
Except that reset isn't happening. Max, Apple's iPhones aren't magically being made in Ohio. Chip factories aren't appearing overnight in Texas. These tariffs aren't forcing China to back down. They're forcing prices to skyrocket. The smart money, sure, they'll make a killing, but working-class Americans, they're about to feel the pain in a way they never saw coming.
It's short-term pain for long-term gains, Sophia. If we don't break free from China's economic grip now, when will we? This is about America's future.
Or it's about America's next recession. Because if this trade war spirals out of control, this economic fight will turn into something a whole lot worse.
Here's the reality. This isn't a trade war. This is an economic war for dominance. The U.S. and China are locked in a battle that neither side can afford to lose. And today, Wall Street is feeling the first real shockwave.
And this is only the beginning. Because what happens next won't just be about stocks and tariffs. It will be about supply chains, technology, energy, and even military strategy. We're entering a new era of economic warfare, and the biggest battles are still ahead.
Before we go further, make sure you subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you never miss an episode. And for more insights, follow us on Twitter. Visit financefrontier.com to explore grouped episodes from all our series. Step into any store in America. Pick up a product, your phone, your laptop, even the clothes on your back. Flip it over. There's a good chance it says made in China. Now imagine this. One day, those supply chains break. Not just a delay, not just higher prices, I mean, completely shattered. That's what's coming. And it's coming fast.
This isn't just theory. It's already happening. Cargo ships stuck at sea, factories closing because they can't get parts. And for the first time, American businesses are waking up to a terrifying reality. Without China, they might not survive.
And that's a good thing. This dependency has been our biggest weakness for decades. We let China build our entire economic backbone while we focused on finance and tech. But now, we're finally taking our country back.
Taking it back, we don't even have the factories to replace what we're losing. Intel is trying to build new chip plants in Arizona, but that'll take years. Ford is scrambling to get car parts without Chinese suppliers. The reality is, cutting China off overnight is like cutting off oxygen mid-flight. We don't have a parachute.
Then maybe we should have thought about that before letting China control our entire supply chain. Pain is inevitable, but independence is priceless. If we want to bring manufacturing back, we have to rip off the Band-Aid. No more outsourcing, no more shortcuts.
Ripping off the Band-Aid? This isn't a paper cut. It's open heart surgery with no anesthesia. American factories can't just snap back into existence. Do you know how much it costs to build an iPhone in the US? 3 times what it costs in China. And guess who pays for that? Every single American consumer.
Let them pay. Inflation is temporary. Economic power is permanent. Look at Apple. They're moving production to India and Vietnam. That's proof we don't need China anymore.
Apple? They're desperate to keep China happy. They're still reliant on Chinese suppliers for key components. And don't even get me started on Tesla. Elon Musk practically lives in Beijing at this point. Big business isn't breaking up with China. They're just looking for a side piece.
So what's your solution? Just roll over and accept that we'll always be China's customer? At what point do we say enough?
The solution is realism. We need a strategy, not a knee-jerk reaction. Build supply chains in Mexico and Southeast Asia. Invest in American manufacturing, but do it before we set the house on fire.
And in the meantime, let China keep ripping us off? Keep flooding our markets with cheap junk while they steal our tech?
Here's the truth. If we rush this, we lose. If we don't rush it, we still might lose. But at least we won't destroy our own economy in the process.
This is bigger than trade. This is survival. The question isn't just whether the U.S. can survive without China. It's whether we're even willing to try.
And if we get it wrong, if we cut too fast with no plan, the supply chain crisis we saw in 2020 will look like a dress rehearsal.
Before we go further, make sure you subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you never miss an episode. And for more insights, follow us on Twitter. Visit financefrontier.com to explore grouped episodes from all our series. This isn't just about tariffs. This is about power, control over AI, quantum computing, semiconductors, the technology that will decide the next global superpower. And the US and China, they're playing for keeps.
And the battlefield isn't some faraway war zone. It's your phone, your car, your bank account. Because whoever wins the tech war doesn't just control the economy, they control everything.
That's why Trump's crackdown on Chinese tech companies was necessary. Huawei, TikTok, semiconductor bans, these aren't just trade disputes. China has been stealing American tech for decades, and now we're finally cutting them off.
Cutting them off? We're cutting ourselves off too. China just launched antitrust probes into Google and NVIDIA. Beijing is making it harder for Apple to operate in China. If we think we can just shut them out and win, we're fooling ourselves.
We don't need China to win. Look at NVIDIA. They're leading the AI revolution. And the semiconductor bans? They're forcing American companies to invest in chip manufacturing here at home.
You mean forcing them to scramble? Intel's factories aren't ready. Taiwan still controls 60% of global chip production. China doesn't need to invade Taiwan to cripple us. They just need to cut off supply chains.
That's why we're taking action now. The AI arms race is happening whether we like it or not. If China controls the future of computing, the US becomes a second-tier power.
And if we push too hard, China will find a way around us. They're already working on domestic chip production. This trade war isn't stopping them, it's accelerating their independence from us.
So what do you want to do? Just hand them the future on a silver platter?
No, but I also don't want to start an unwinnable war. China has 1.4 billion people. They have the resources, the labor force, and the government backing to build whatever they need. If we make them our enemy, they'll stop at nothing to replace us.
Then we better make sure they don't get the chance.
Or we better make sure we don't turn this trade war into something much, much worse.
Let's take a step back. This tech war, it's been brewing for decades. The US once dominated the semiconductor industry, but companies offshored everything to Asia. Now we're waking up and realizing that the backbone of our entire digital economy is controlled by factories in Taiwan and South Korea. That's not just a supply chain problem. That's a national security crisis.
And China knows it. That's why they're investing hundreds of billions into their own chip industry. They're trying to erase their dependence on Taiwan. And let's not forget, they already produce more engineers each year than we do. If we think we can just sanction them into submission, we're delusional.
We aren't just sanctioning them, we're out innovating them. American companies still hold the lead in AI, in quantum computing, and chip design. But we have to stay aggressive. This is a war of attrition.
Aggressive? What happens when China retaliates? If they decide to cut off rare earth minerals, American tech companies will be in deep trouble. We need those materials for everything: phones, electric vehicles, military hardware. And 80% of rare earth minerals are processed in China. You don't think they'll use that as leverage?
Sure, they might, but that's why we need alternatives. The US is already ramping up rare earth mining in Australia and Canada. We can secure our supply chains, but it takes time. And that's exactly why we have to act now before it's too late.
Time? That's what we don't have. The global AI race is heating up. China is pouring money into AI startups, quantum research, and 6G technology. And guess what? They aren't waiting for us to figure out our supply chains. They're racing ahead.
And that's why we have to think bigger. This isn't just about chips, AI, or supply chains. It's about who leads the next century. The US has been the dominant superpower for decades, but China is challenging that. The tech war is just the latest front in a much larger battle for global influence.
And if we don't play this carefully, we could end up accelerating China's rise instead of stopping it. Because every time we push too hard, they respond by building their own alternatives. This isn't just about winning, it's about making sure we don't lose everything in the process.
One thing's for sure, this war isn't slowing down. It's only getting bigger. And if we aren't ready for what's next, we'll find ourselves looking up at China instead of leading the world.
Or worse, we'll find ourselves in a war that isn't just about technology anymore.
You think the trade war is just about goods? Think again. China holds a trump card, oil. And if Beijing decides to cut off American energy imports or flood the market with cheap Russian crude, the U.S. economy could be in for a shock it never saw coming.
That's not just speculation. It's already happening. China is shifting its energy strategy, buying record amounts of oil from Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. They're bypassing U.S. sanctions, cutting the dollar out of global energy trade, and making sure they don't need American oil at all.
That's exactly why we have to stay ahead of this. Energy dominance is the key to economic power. If we lose that leverage, we lose everything. And China? They're trying to make sure that happens.
Look at the numbers. China is now the world's largest importer of oil. They're building strategic alliances with the Middle East, negotiating long-term supply deals with Saudi Arabia, and investing billions in African energy infrastructure. If the U.S. keeps escalating the trade war, Beijing could use its influence to redirect global oil flows, sidelining American energy companies completely.
And that's why we need to take back control. The U.S. has the largest oil reserves in the world. We have the capacity to be energy independent. But instead of using that power, we're letting China rewrite the global energy map while we sit on the sidelines.
And what happens if China weaponizes energy? Let's say they convince OPEC Plus to price oil in yuan instead of dollars. That wouldn't just hurt American energy producers, it would strike at the heart of the U.S. financial system. The petrodollar is what gives the U.S. its economic dominance. If China breaks that, the fallout could be catastrophic.
Then we better be ready. The U.S. needs to double down on energy production, ramp up domestic oil and gas drilling, and start securing its own trade deals. Because if we let China dictate global energy markets, we'll be playing defense for the next 50 years.
But that's exactly the problem. This isn't just about who drills the most oil. It's about who controls the energy economy of the future. And right now, China is leading in renewables. They're the world's largest producer of solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicle batteries. While the U.S. fights over fossil fuels, China is buying up the industries that will dominate the next century.
And yet, they still rely on fossil fuels. China's energy consumption is skyrocketing, and they're addicted to coal. Even their renewables depend on rare earth minerals they barely have enough of. If we cut them off from Western tech and materials, their so-called green revolution collapses.
Are you sure about that? Because China is already locking in supply chains. They're investing in lithium mines in Africa and South America, cutting deals with Australia for critical minerals, and setting up joint ventures with European battery makers. They aren't just thinking about today, they're playing a long-term game.
And we should be too. But instead of securing our energy dominance, we're stuck in political battles over pipelines, drilling, and regulations. Meanwhile, China is making deals, building infrastructure, and positioning itself as the world's energy superpower.
It's not just energy, it's influence. Countries that rely on China for energy will follow China's lead on trade, finance, and geopolitics. The more Beijing expands its energy empire, the more leverage they have to push the U.S. out of key global markets.
Then the U.S. better start thinking bigger. It's not enough to just drill for more oil. We need to take back leadership in energy technology, dominate nuclear power, and secure our hold on next-gen renewables. Because if we let China win this war, we're handing them the keys to the global economy.
And if we overplay our hand, if we turn this trade war into a full-scale energy war, the global economy could collapse. Because if oil and gas markets spiral out of control, we're not just looking at inflation, we're looking at economic devastation.
That's why we have to act now. Because if we don't, we'll wake up one day and realize the U.S. isn't the world's energy superpower anymore. And once we lose that title, we'll never get it back.
And by the time we realize it, it might already be too late.
This trade war isn't just about China. It's about BRICS, de-dollarization, and Taiwan, the flashpoint that could turn this economic fight into an all-out war. And if we cross that line, there's no going back.
And China is making sure they have backup. While the U.S. escalates tariffs, Beijing is locking in new trade alliances. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa is expanding. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Argentina, and Egypt are all looking to join. If this keeps up, we're not isolating China, they're isolating us.
That's the problem, isn't it? The U.S. has spent decades as the center of the global economy, and now, for the first time, that dominance is being questioned. BRICS is trying to build a world where they don't need us anymore. If they succeed, the U.S. dollar won't be the world's reserve currency. It'll just be another currency.
And it's already happening. Trade between BRICS nations is increasingly being done in local currencies instead of dollars. China and Russia are conducting energy deals in yuan. Saudi Arabia is considering selling oil in something other than dollars for the first time in history. If enough countries move away from the dollar, the entire global financial system will shift, and not in our favor.
Then we better stop it. The U.S. controls the global financial order because the world relies on the dollar. If we let China convince the world to ditch the dollar, we'll lose the single greatest economic weapon we have.
And how do you propose stopping it? The more we pressure China, the more they double down on their alliances. We've sanctioned Russia, now Russia is fully in China's camp. We tried to control oil markets, now Saudi Arabia is looking at alternatives. Every time we push, China counters, and sooner or later, we're going to run out of moves.
We're not out of moves yet. But if BRICS keeps growing, it's not just about trade, it's about Taiwan. Because if China believes they have enough global backing, they might finally make a move on Taiwan. And that changes everything.
Taiwan isn't just some island in the Pacific, it's the global capital of semiconductor production. If China takes Taiwan, they don't just gain territory, they gain control over the most advanced chip manufacturing facilities in the world. The same chips that power iPhones, AI, and even military weapons.
And that's why the U.S. can't afford to let that happen. If China moves on Taiwan, we're not just looking at an economic war anymore. We're looking at something far worse.
And if the U.S. overplays its hand? If we escalate tensions too fast, we could trigger the very conflict we're trying to prevent. China has spent the last decade modernizing its military. They're running war drills near Taiwan constantly. If they feel cornered, they might take the risk and invade because to them, Taiwan isn't just a trade asset. It's a national obsession.
Then we have to make it clear that if they move on Taiwan, the consequences will be severe. Not just sanctions, not just economic penalties, but military action.
You really think the U.S. is ready for that? Because if we go down that road, it won't just be China we're fighting. Russia will back them. BRICS countries will refuse to support us. We could find ourselves in an economic war that spirals into a real war.
So what's the alternative? Just sit back and watch China take over global trade, weaken the dollar, expand BRICS, and then seize Taiwan when they feel strong enough? Because that's the path we're on right now.
The alternative is understanding that we can't win this alone. The U.S. needs allies. Europe, Japan, South Korea, India, countries that also have a stake in making sure China doesn't rewrite the rules of the global economy. But if we treat this like a one-on-one battle, we'll lose.
We won't lose if we act before it's too late. The battle for Taiwan, for the dollar, for global leadership, it's already happening. The question is whether the U.S. is prepared to fight back.
Or whether we're walking into a fight we can't win.
Every crisis creates winners. And if you know where to look, this trade war isn't a disaster. It's an opportunity. The only question is, are you ready to profit from the chaos?
That's a nice thought, but let's be real. Most people aren't going to profit from this. The average investor, the small business owner, they're about to take a massive hit. The winners? They're the ones who already have the money, the influence, and the ability to move before anyone else.
Exactly. That's why hedge funds are shorting Chinese stocks while retail investors panic. Defense contractors are raking in profits as tensions rise. AI and semiconductor companies in the U.S. are getting billions in government subsidies while their Chinese counterparts face export bans. The people who understand how the game works are positioning themselves right now.
And the losers? Manufacturing companies caught in the supply chain nightmare. Retailers forced to raise prices because of higher tariffs. American farmers who are now shut out of one of their biggest markets. This isn't a clean-cut battle. It's a messy, chaotic war, and not everyone makes it out alive.
But the biggest loser? Anyone betting on a return to normal. This trade war isn't going away. If anything, it's accelerating. The U.S. and China are locked in a permanent struggle for economic dominance. You either adapt or you get left behind.
So what's the move? Where does the money go next?
Defense stocks, energy production, domestic manufacturing, anything that benefits from a stronger U.S. supply chain. The government is pouring money into these sectors, and big investors are following the money.
And if China retaliates, if they start blocking U.S. companies, cutting off resources, and forcing their own industries to rise, what happens then?
That's why this is a battlefield. China isn't just sitting back. They're countering at every turn. They're investing in domestic semiconductor production, accelerating their AI development, and making deals with BRICS nations to build trade alliances without the U.S. This isn't just an economic war. It's a race to see who can build the future faster.
And that's the part that should worry everyone. Because if the US and China both try to outmaneuver each other, this war won't stay economic forever. The bigger the stakes, the greater the risks. And when two superpowers push too hard, history tells us how these battles usually end.
The fight for economic dominance is just getting started. And the winners? They're the ones who see what's coming next before anyone else. If you want to stay ahead of these global shifts, don't just listen. Take action. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and follow us on Twitter. Dive deeper with our full lineup: Finance Frontier, AI Frontier, Make Money, and Mindset Frontier, all curated in one place at financefrontierai.com. And if you're already following us, help us grow by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's the best way to support the show and reach more listeners like you. And don't miss out. Sign up for our newsletter to get exclusive insights, breaking financial news, and expert analysis delivered straight to your inbox. Music in this episode, including Not Without the Rest by Twin Musicom, is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. Finance Frontier AI copyright 2024. Unauthorized reproduction or distribution is prohibited.